Good morning and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am Castlekeeper Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video I am going to be focusing on the Castlekeeper's Guide and how it deals with new and variant races. If you've been following my channel, you know that I've already done a video for each of the 7 official character races for Castles and Crusades. However, there are some systems that are found in the Castle Keeper's Guide, as you can see here, with just tons and tons of optional rules. If you're not familiar with the Castles and Crusades system, you only need one book in order to play it, and that's the Player's Handbook. It's helpful to have the monsters and treasures if you are going to be a castle keeper. And then the Castle Keeper's Guide just gives a whole slew of additional rules and options and such, plus charts and graphs and other things that you can utilize in creating and running your campaigns. But there are only 2 core books for this game system, and technically one if you're just looking to play it. So I wanted to take a look at the rules here for new and variant races, because you might want to go beyond just the 7 official races that are in the Player's Handbook. So without further ado, let's start taking a look at those that are in the Castle Keeper's Guide. So here we have the section, and I know it's kind of like in between pages and everything. This is part of a greater section of the Castle Keeper's Guide, which is expanding characters, which I had mentioned previously in an earlier video, but I want to focus on this part here of expanding character races. So Castles and Crusades Player Handbook details 7 different character races available to players. That's dwarf, elf, gnome, halfling, half-elf, half-orc, and human. These 7 races represent the archetypes of racial creatures. We find them in most branches of fantasy literature, from comics to movies to novels to video games. Castles and Crusades, as a game of archetypes, does not readily provide any information about other races, whether variants of the 7 or altogether new races. However, players, particularly experienced players, often desire to expand their own horizons, branching out of the normal racial barriers. This character expansion may be something as simple as a variant race, such as wanting to play an aquatic elf, for example, or it may be something far more complex to integrate, such as a bugbear. Whatever the case, the Castle Keeper must carefully weigh the addition of new races or racial variants. 3 types of racial additions exist: racial variant, monster races, and new races. These bring a whole new level of complexity to the game. Racial variants, these are new races built upon the foundations of an already existing race. In the world of Aird, the wild elf classifies as a racial variant. These elves possess many of the traits of a high elf and some lessened powers common to all elves, which offers their racially unique powers. Monster races, these are monsters converted to a class system. New races consist of completely new racial constructs. Things to consider: adding any new rules, monsters, classes, or even races requires adjustments to the game's balance. Mechanically, C&C has an internal game balance where the monsters roughly equate to character levels, allowing monsters to challenge the ever-advancing character. The Siege engine balances the character levels, hit points, abilities, and attributes with other characters, as well as with monsters' hit dice. armor class, and abilities. Merging the two may cause complications, and the castle keeper must take into account before integrating any new monster race as a player race. Although a monster race to gain class levels on top of its natural abilities may set the race ahead above the other races. Once on the surface, this may sound okay, but it immediately creates a problem in the running of the game, and as encounters that were challenging for an entire party may no longer be challenging to a new player race. Or conversely, if they are challenging for a new player race, they may prove too deadly to the other party members. Example, allowing a player to play a hill giant ranger combines skills such as the favorite enemy with an already tremendous ability to deal massive damage. At 5th level, a hill giant ranger rolls 2d8 damage for his weapon, and when the situation calls for it, adds a combat marauder bonus of +5. After tossing in a strength bonus of +3, the hill giant ranger does an average of 16 points per swing, which is significantly higher than rangers of normal character races. Monsters occupy a vital place in Castles and Crusades game, and turning them into player characters runs the risk of unmasking a host of challenges the CK may not want to unleash. In order for a player to play a monster as a character, he must know the monster's abilities and limitations. Enterprising castle keepers change those abilities constantly during the course of the game to either make the game more challenging or to lighten the danger. Castle keepers should caution any player that the monster or variant race he creates is not subject to the rules detailed in the Monsters and Treasure book. Instead, the character is subject to the rules and guidelines governing the character's class as the castle keeper determines they are applicable. There are other balancing issues that also come into play. I'm not going to get into the real nitty gritty here. There's second only to the game balance is consideration of the other players, which we kind of covered that as well. That creating challenges for them would create even greater challenges for the other players playing the traditional character races. I want to go to one of the examples where it seems that they really did strike this balance. All right. But let's take a look at hit dice, and I see this one example here that jumps out to me. So here they're talking about hit dice. Monsters possess an established hit die that does not advance as the monster adventures or grows older. Discard this hit die entirely and instead use the chosen class established hit die. A bugbear with 3d8 hit die becomes a first level fighter with 1d10 hit points. Even very large creatures should lose their natural hit dice exchanging in for a character class hit die. All right, so that's one modification that you're certainly going to do. Special weapons. Many monsters use special weapons, and CKs may consider allowing them. Any such weapon cannot conflict with the class open weapons or armor limitations. All right, so when allowing special weapons, address the game's balance and making certain, so you have to make these other considerations as well. Special abilities. Many races possess special abilities such as shape change, spell resistance, and spell like abilities. These abilities do not merge with existing class abilities well, nor do they normally allow for any kind of game balance. The best way to handle these is to slow the character's level advancement. For each special ability, the Castle Keeper could add 1,000 experience points to the character's level progression chart and double the amount for each successful level. At second level, add 1,000. At third level add 2,000, and so on and so forth. This will give a first level monster fighter, let's say, all of these special abilities of the monster from the monsters and treasures, and all of the class abilities. However, it's going to take this character much, much longer to go up in levels. It's essentially multi-classing, and that's how a castle keeper should look at this. Is that this character now is a multi-classed character, and that's one way you can work around it as well. Um, so let's get to some examples here, and I just want to show you. So these first two examples here are just variants, and those are much easier to utilize. So the deep dwarf is a variant of a dwarf, and so the this racial group might have some modifications, like they might have a different animosity, they might have farther, in this case, a much better deep vision than what normal dwarves have. They also determine depth and direction at a higher ability, but they are going to have some real some real issues with like resistance, right? Or with their they will have a daylight fighting penalty. They will have more weapon limitations because of just the nature of how they were, how they lived for millennia, if not from the very beginning of time when they, were created, right? So we have these variants to abilities based on it, but it's a much simpler way of doing it. And you can see they have different attribute modifiers based solely on the fact that this is the this is how this race or race variant actually lived and experienced and such. And so that's how you have a variant race. Here we have the long leaf halflings. Again, just like a wild halfling, a more secluded, and so they're going to have certain differences in how they relate to other races, because they are such a secluded race, and living in the wilderness. They have uh, they have advantages to natural magic like druidic magic, and yet disadvantages to arcane magic because they just don't encounter that many wielders of arcane magic. They will have wilderness lore as one of their abilities at the same level as a druid, but they have limitations. They're more susceptible to diseases because they have not mixed with other races or other regions of the world as often. And so they have those typical limitations that halflings generally have. They'll have some advantages that halflings don't have, and they have some just unique factors to them. So once again, very easy, or easier, I should say. It is easier to create a variant race. Here we have a third example of an orc, and these are not official. These are just examples that Troll Lord Games came up with. But I think that you can see the real trend in this, and like how you should handle this. I'm going to read through the orc because I want you to see how, and I had another player actually looking at this, and another castle keeper, as a matter of fact. He was like, wow, this is, I mean, why would you want to play an orc when you read this here? So let me start. Orcs are a very aggressive and warlike race. They enjoy the fight and lust in the carnage of war. They tend to eschew magic with the exception of their spiritual leaders, whose primary role is as adjunct attacker and enforcer of cruel lifestyles orcs live. They hold martial prowess in the highest esteem. Orcs are less intelligent than other creatures. They move. They have a -1 to moving silently. They have a -2 to hide. They have a horrendous stench. Orcs smell. They do not consider bathing and cleaning themselves a trait worthy of their time. As such, anyone can smell an orc's reek a long way off. Covered as they are in the debris of their life's work, orcs suffer a -2 penalty on surprise attempts. They do have dark vision up to 120 feet in pitch blackness. Their enhanced smell. Orcs can smell like a bloodhound. They can smell anything different from their own sense within 60 yards. They make it nearly impossible to surprise an orc. They receive a +2 to all surprise checks when being surprised. All right, so it's very hard to surprise them. They have tough hide. So orcs have a thick hides. Their skins are normally 3 times as thick as a human or a dwarf skin. Furthermore, it is leathery, consisting of a bark-like quality and affording an orc an automatic +2 bonus to their armor class. We see here their modifiers, and this is where I say, but like, wow, this is a really tough class to play, or race to play, because it's going to impact your attributes across the board and almost all negative, with the exception of strength and constitution. So orcs are going to get a +2 strength, a -1 dexterity, a +2 constitution, a -3 intelligence, a -3 wisdom, and a -4 to charisma. All right. So anything not directly related to a strength and toughness, all right, they are at an extreme disadvantage here. And remember, they're only going to get 2 attribute primes, one for their class, which their typical class is only fighter. So they're only going to get a primary in strength and then one other choice. And you can see their choices are not that great to begin with overall. All right, then you get into the racial interactions. They're going to have a very difficult time interacting with anything that is not also a monster race, such as goblins or hobgoblins or gnolls, and even they don't get along all that well. So it's going to be a very, very difficult task to play a monster race in any kind of a setting where they're a rarity, and they're not going to have very good racial interactions across the board. I mean, you can even see how half orcs have a hard time getting along with others. Imagine a full blown orc trying to do the same thing. But if that's what the players want to do, if they want to effectively role play, and that's why I like that there's a whole section in here on role playing these mechanics and role playing it through. I skipped over it at some point here, but it is in here where they talk about role playing through. Before embarking on an onerous task of creating a new race, consider conferring with the player to find a way of using existing examples by consulting with the player. But if they're dead set on it, now you're just going to try to kind of role play it out and see how is this thing going to work. And it is through that collaboration between the castle keeper and the player that I'm sure that if everyone is skilled at the table, they can actually make this work. But it's going to be a significant modifier, let's say, and I'll switch views here. It's going to be a significant modifier on the part of the castle keeper and on the part of the player in constantly thinking about interactions that are going to take place with these character races that are kind of on the outside of the norm. Again, even the variants have enough detractors to them that the players are going to have to be very, very specific about how they're going to integrate that character into the rest of the group, and hammer out a way that it's going to work for the group overall, and be a benefit to the group overall. Unless you were doing a campaign that was like all of that racial variant, or all of that humanoid racial variant. Like if you're going to do if you're going to do like an evil campaign and everyone's an orc or a goblin or a hobgoblin, um, then that's a totally different story. But if you're looking for a mixed party, uh, even though the Castle Keeper's Guide has rules for it, it has hints and tips and suggestions for doing so. Um, you will have to rely either on your own experience, and hopefully it's a good amount of experience, and an experienced castle keeper, and some of these many, many volumes of books that are giving you hints and tips and other suggestions of employing rules variants. So um, I encourage you all to delve into some of these differences and some of these optional rules, and give them a try. And especially as a castle keeper, allow your players to dabble with some of these things, and give it a try out. And if it succeeds, great. If it fails, that's also good, because now you'll start to see that not everything is purely designed as something that's viable in your game, and in your setting, or whatever. There's reasons for these things, and so sometimes you have to learn from experience, and learn from your mistakes, that oh, this is why this game rule is the way that it is, or this is why these are optional rules as opposed to the official rules. So as always, just keep on testing things out, keep on, bending some of those barriers, and seeing, where you can still maximize the amount of fun and interesting things that you're doing, while at the same time still playing the game system as it was intended. Some flexibility in it, yes, but not to the breaking point. So that's the key that I think they reiterate over and over again, to be cautious about breaking the internal mechanics of the game. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will be back with more Castles and Crusades on Thursday with the next character class feature. And as I said, I ran out of the racial variants and races for Castles and Crusades, and so now I'll be focusing more on the remainder of the official classes, and then I'm going to get into the Adventures backpack book, which includes a whole slew of additional variant classes for Castles and Crusades. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for stopping in. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave that in the questions and comments sections. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. And as always, I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon, or hopefully live in person at a gaming convention coming up very soon. So you have a great rest of your day.